My name is Leona Whitfield, and I'm 65. I've spent decades caring for my family, managing this Charleston house, and keeping the memory of my late husband alive in every polished surface and sunlit corner. I never thought I'd wake up one Thursday morning to a scene that would make me question everything I'd built for myself and my family. I was in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and watching the morning light spill across the hardwood floors, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Mara, my daughter-in-law, and her husband stepped in as if they owned the place. Mara's smile was bright, rehearsed, and utterly smug. "We need a little family support," she said, her voice sweet as sugar but heavy with entitlement. Before I could respond, my son appeared from the hall. His words cut sharper than any knife I'd ever known. "Take the guest room or move out. It's your choice." My chest tightened. My heart skipped, and disbelief anchored itself in my throat. I stared at them, the house suddenly feeling too small, too unfamiliar, as though the walls themselves were judging me. Mara leaned against the frame, her bright eyes daring me to protest. "It'll be good for you," she said cheerfully. A fresh start. I swallowed, feeling years of loyalty and sacrifice collide with this sudden, blatant dismissal. The quiet house I had tended for so long now felt like a stage for a betrayal I hadn't anticipated. I stepped back, gripping the doorframe, and realized that nothing about this morning would be ordinary. I sank into the armchair by the window, the early morning sun warming the faded fabric, and let my mind drift back over the decades. This house had been my husband's pride, a place he rebuilt from the ground up with his own hands. And after he passed, it became mine to protect. I had kept it immaculate, every floorboard polished, every corner dusted, every flower in the garden planted and tended with care. After his heart failure, I stayed on not because I wanted to, but because someone had to. Managing the mortgage, paying the utilities, arranging repairs, handling insurance claims. I did it all while navigating the emptiness he left behind. I gave up promotions that would have taken me across the country, declined company housing, set aside my hobbies, and traded nights out for evenings filled with paperwork and bills. Every decision was measured, every sacrifice calculated, so the family and the house could remain intact. Mara had arrived at 23, fresh from college and married to my son, and from the very beginning. She seemed to float through life with an invisible force field shielding her from responsibility. Everything came easily to her: designer clothes, compliments, attention. She never had to lift a finger to maintain appearances or contribute to the household. Her privilege was glaring, a constant reminder of the contrast between her effortless life and mine. I had tried to ignore it, to soften my resentment with patience and understanding. But sitting here now, the memory of that morning's betrayal weighed on me. Years of unwavering devotion, of work unnoticed and gratitude unspoken, collided with the realization that I had spent my life putting others first. And for what? The door to the guest room creaked behind me, and I could hear faint footsteps on the hardwood floor. I remembered the way Mara had always glided through family gatherings, the center of every conversation, the one everyone leaned toward for smiles and praise. From the moment she joined the family, her presence seemed to eclipse mine. Compliments flowed freely for her: the perfect dress, the flawless manners, the clever anecdotes. But for me, even small achievements were met with indifference or gentle corrections. "Leona, you should try a brighter scarf," my mother-in-law would say, her voice light but pointed, as if my choices were always slightly wrong. Mara, Of course. Never needed advice. Her hair shone under the chandelier light. Her laughter carried across the room. Her words welcomed. I, by contrast, became the background noise, the one who cooked, cleaned, and smoothed over family tensions. Never noticed, never praised. I had learned to tolerate the comparisons, to mask the hurt behind polite smiles and quiet nods. But it gnawed at me. This invisible existence in my own home. Every unsolicited piece of guidance, every sigh at my supposed missteps, reminded me of my place secondary, expendable, unnoticed. Even my son seemed to measure me against her, praising Mara's decisions and dismissing my suggestions with a polite, "That's fine, Mom." I clenched my hands in my lap, feeling the familiar mix of frustration and exhaustion, years of dedication, of managing the house, the finances, and the endless small crises, had not earned me recognition. Instead, it had rendered me invisible, a fixture taken for granted, a vessel for others' comfort and convenience. And yet, I had kept going, hoping that my loyalty, my quiet presence, might one day be enough to make them see me not the shadow beside Mara, but the woman who had kept this family afloat through decades of challenges. The front door clicked again, and I knew the morning's confrontation was only the beginning. I had barely finished arranging the breakfast dishes when my son, Daniel, stepped into the kitchen. His expression was unreadable, but the weight in his voice left no room for negotiation. "Mom, you need to decide. Take the guest room or move out. That's it." I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. My home, my husband's house, the place I had kept alive for decades, was suddenly reduced to a choice between discomfort and exile. Before I could protest, Mara's cheerful voice cut in, leaning casually against the doorway. "It'll be good for you. Leona, a fresh start. You'll see." Their words, meant to soothe or persuade, only sharpened the sting. I realized then that this wasn't about logistics or necessity. It was about preference, favoritism, and convenience. My years of dedication, the countless nights spent managing bills and repairs, the careful maintenance of every corner of this house, they meant nothing. They had been taken for granted, overlooked, as though the sacrifices I had made were invisible. Daniel tried to justify it. "We're just trying to help Mara and me settle in. The house is big enough. You'll be comfortable in the guest room." His tone carried a weight of duty, but it rang hollow. The comfort they promised was built on the foundation of my displacement. The decision was mine. Yes, but only in appearance. The reality was stark, my home, my labor, my devotion, all dismissed in favor of someone else's convenience. I sank into the chair by the window, gripping the armrests as my mind raced. The morning sunlight no longer felt warm. It felt intrusive, illuminating the truth I had avoided for too long. My loyalty, my decades of effort, had been assumed, exploited, and minimized for the first time. I understood how completely my home and my life had been taken for granted. I rose slowly, knowing that the choice before me was not trivial. Later that afternoon, I retreated to the study, the quietest room in the house. Hoping to think without interruption, my fingers traced the spines of books I had once arranged meticulously, and my gaze fell on a folder I hadn't touched in months. It was from HR, the paperwork for the corporate housing. I had declined years ago, when I thought my family needed me more than I needed myself. I opened it with trembling hands, scanning the details. A small, clean apartment just a few blocks from my late husband's former office. Rent reasonable, utilities included, and a move-in bonus that made it immediately feasible. The reality of it hit me. I could leave. not out of desperation, but by choice. Not to escape, but to reclaim my life. The thought filled me with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I sat back, letting the words sink in. For years, I had measured my days by the needs of others paying bills, fixing leaky faucets, smoothing over conflicts, keeping the house and family afloat. And yet, I had never paused to ask myself what I truly wanted, what I truly deserved. Now, in this small, overlooked folder, lay the possibility of doing exactly that. I thought of the guest room, of Mara's smug smile, of Daniel's polite dismissal. I thought of all the mornings I had woken up to silence, to chores, to thankless work. And I realized that the choice was no longer about obligation or loyalty. It was about me, my dignity, my freedom, my peace. The apartment wasn't grand, and the move wouldn't be effortless, but the thought of waking up in a space that belonged entirely to me, of setting my own rules, of making my own decisions without interference, ignited a determination I hadn't felt in decades. I closed the folder, a quiet resolve settling over me. I would move out. I would take control of my life, reclaim my home and my time, and finally, prioritize myself. The path ahead was clear, and for the first time in a long time, it felt right. The next morning, I began the work of reclaiming my life. I made calls to movers I had used years ago for small deliveries, carefully coordinating dates and times so that the transition would be smooth, quiet, and irreversible. Each conversation felt like a declaration this time. I was taking charge. Boxes lined the hallways as I methodically sorted through decades of accumulated belongings. Every book, every photograph, every kitchen utensil held a memory of labor and love, but also a reminder of how long I had been overlooked. I packed them with care, labeling each container with precision, as if sealing away the years I had spent giving without recognition. Meanwhile, in the kitchen and living room, Mara and her husband were oblivious to my plan. I could hear them discussing paint colors, furniture swaps, and layouts for the renovated space they assumed they would inherit. Mara's laugh carried down the hallway as she described moving the sectional couch into the family room. The sound should have irritated me, but instead, it steeled my resolve. Their ignorance made my choice easier. I paused to glance around the house, imagining the silence that would fill these rooms once I left. The quiet I had longed for would not be granted by confrontation, yelling, or argument. It would come from the absence I was orchestrating, the deliberate reclaiming of my space and autonomy. By evening, the first movers arrived, and I directed them with calm authority. Nothing in the house was overlooked, nothing left to chance. As the sun set over Charleston, casting long shadows through the windows, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. For the first time in decades, I was preparing to leave not out of fear or duty, but because I deserved it. Saturday morning arrived with a hot Charleston breeze drifting through the open windows. I stood in the doorway, clipboard in hand, as the movers began their work, one by one. The items I had spent decades collecting: furniture, bookshelves, framed photographs, kitchenware were carried out and loaded into the truck. Each box lifted felt like a weight removed from my shoulders, a quiet declaration that this house, long taken for granted, was no longer mine to sustain for anyone but myself. From the living room, I heard Mara exclaim, "Where is everything going? I thought this was still Mom's house." Her voice, sharp with disbelief, carried through the hallway. Daniel appeared behind her, brow furrowed, scanning the empty spaces where furniture once stood. Panic flared across their faces, as they realized the scale of what had been taken, not just belongings, but the assumption of my presence and my labor. I directed the movers calmly, arranging the last of the boxes in the truck. Nothing was left behind. Not the coffee maker. Not the mattress. Not the carefully filed paperwork that had documented years of payments and renovations. Every corner of the house bore the absence of my work, a silent testament to the authority I had finally reclaimed. Mara's voice trembled now. "You can't just take everything," she shouted, half in anger, half in panic. Daniel's eyes darted between his wife and the empty rooms. Realizing for the first time that the home they had counted on was only operational because of my decades of effort, they had relied on me. Every bill paid, every repair made, every quiet compromise. Without ever acknowledging it, I met their gazes evenly, neither apologetic nor triumphant, simply resolute. Their panic was mine to witness, a mirror reflecting all the times I had been invisible. All the sacrifices they had assumed were effortless. The house, once familiar and comforting, now belonged solely to me, my history, my labor, my rules. As the movers closed the truck doors, leaving the once lived-in home hollow, I exhaled, feeling a clarity I hadn't known in decades. The power had shifted. For the first time, they understood without words, without confrontation, what it meant to underestimate me. I stepped back from the doorway as Mara and Daniel surveyed the empty rooms, their faces pale and incredulous. The panic that had flitted across their expressions moments ago now settled into sharp, almost tangible tension. I let them take in the hollow space for a few seconds longer, letting reality sink in before speaking. All of it, the furniture, the kitchenware, the paperwork, everything I've accumulated over decades is gone. I said calmly, "It's all mine, bought with my money, maintained with my labor, and that includes the mortgage. I've been covering it for years." Mara's breath caught in her throat. "Wait, what do you mean, the mortgage? We thought..." She trailed off, looking to Daniel for support, but his own face had drained of color. "Yes," I continued, "every payment, every bill, every repair me. I've kept this house afloat while you assumed it would always be here, ready for you. As if it ran on its own, my voice was steady, but my pulse thudded against my ribs. The years of unrecognized effort finally finding a voice? Daniel ran a hand over his face, disbelief etched into every line. We didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked," I said softly. "You assumed. You relied on me for comfort, for security, for convenience, and never stopped to consider the work, the sacrifice, or the responsibility it entailed." Mara stepped forward, her usual composure faltering. I thought there was money set aside. Insurance. Savings. We were promised I took care of what needed to be taken care of." I interrupted gently. "The insurance, the savings, the household funds they were never meant for you to depend on. You relied on me, not the finances." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the empty rooms. Their eyes darted around, taking in the absence of my years of labor. The power had shifted. Panic, guilt, and frustration rippled through them while I stood calm, grounded, and unshaken. Finally, I took a deep breath. The weight of decades of assumed invisibility lifted slightly. I had not only removed myself physically from the house, but had laid bare the truth of every sacrifice, every unacknowledged hour, and every laborious effort. And for the first time, they understood what it meant to depend entirely on someone else's dedication. The moving truck rumbled down the quiet Charleston street as I stepped into the lobby of my new apartment building, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. The space was modest sunlight spilling across polished hardwood floors, a compact kitchen gleaming with new appliances. But it was mine. No one else's opinions. No obligations. No expectations. Just the quiet hum of independence. I carried the first boxes into the apartment and set them down carefully, as though planting the foundation for a life I had long deferred. Each item unpacked my favorite mug, the worn armchair from my study. The stack of novels that had collected dust felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been hidden beneath decades of work and loyalty. The familiar scent of the house I had cared for so meticulously was replaced by the clean promise of beginnings. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I allowed myself to breathe fully for the first time in years, the tension in my shoulders, the ache in my back from years of silent labor, the tightness in my chest from constantly being unseen. They all began to loosen. I reflected on every evening spent paying bills, managing repairs, smoothing over family tensions, and quietly sacrificing my own comfort. Each decision I had made out of love, duty, or habit had been taken for granted. But now, here in this apartment, they were honored in their absence. I looked out the window at the rooftops of Charleston, sunlight glinting on the historic brick and wrought iron, and felt a swell of pride I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. For the first time, the life I had lived for others and the labor I had performed without acknowledgement were my own. The city stretched out before me, full of quiet streets and possibilities, and I knew that this solitude was not loneliness. It was liberation. As I set down the last box and turned the key in the lock, a sense of finality settled over me. The chapter of service and sacrifice, of invisibility and expectation, was behind me. Ahead lay a life chosen entirely by me, guided by my own decisions, my own desires, and my own dignity. For the first time in a long time, I was free. Weeks passed, and the apartment became a home. Mornings were quiet, but filled with intention. Sunlight spilling across the counter as I brewed coffee, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs drifting up. I rediscovered small joys I had long set aside, leisurely walks along the cobblestone streets of Charleston's historic district. Afternoons lost in novels I had neglected. Evenings spent cooking dishes I truly wanted to eat rather than what pleased someone else. Each day carried a gentle rhythm I had chosen for myself, a melody composed of independence and care. Opportunities began to emerge, subtle at first. A neighbor mentioned a local volunteer group helping preserve historic gardens, and I joined. Soon, I was guiding visitors, sharing stories of the city's past, feeling a renewed sense of purpose in my knowledge and experience. Work from my previous career reached out as well, consulting projects that allowed me to contribute without compromising my autonomy. For the first time in decades, my time and energy were my own. And the recognition I had longed for came not from expectation, but from genuine respect across town. I caught whispers of Mara and Daniel adjusting to their new reality. The once spacious apartment they had assumed was mine had been replaced by a modest one-bedroom, and the weight of responsibility they had ignored now pressed heavily upon them. I heard that Mara had begun working part-time at a small boutique, and Daniel was sorting through debts that had once seemed inconsequential. I did not gloat. Their struggle was a quiet affirmation, a mirror of the consequences of entitlement. Sitting by my window one evening, Charleston's rooftops bathed in gold. I felt the profound calm of a life reclaimed. I had weathered years of invisibility, sacrificed countless comforts, and endured the weight of unacknowledged labor. Yet in standing up, in leaving what no longer honored me, I had found dignity, empowerment, and an unshakable sense of self, the apartment. My routines, my independence, all were testaments to a choice long delayed but finally made. I smiled softly, listening to the distant church bells, feeling a serenity I had once thought impossible. Everything had fallen apart, yet from the fragments, I had built a life wholly my own.